The Mediterranean became a key front in the struggle between Christianity and Islam as the Ottoman Empire expanded, and in 1571, Philip II of Spain joined forces with Venice and the papacy to defeat the Ottomans. In 1580, Philip inherited the Portuguese crown, creating the Iberian Union and uniting their global empires for 60 years. This marked the height of Spain's Golden Age, a period of immense imperial power and cultural achievement with artists like El Greco, Diego, and Murillo, writers such as Miguel de Cervantes, and architectural marvels like El Escorial. Yet Spain's political and economic strength declined in the 17th century due to the 30 Years' War revolts, and territorial losses culminating in the death of Charles II in 1700 without an heir, which triggered the War of the Spanish Succession. The Bourbon dynasty emerged, bringing reforms under Philip V and later Charles III, who modernized agriculture, infrastructure, and governance through Enlightenment-inspired policies. But Spain's dominance waned. The Napoleonic Wars brought further turmoil as Napoleon installed his brother, Joseph, on the Spanish throne in 1808, sparking the Peninsular War, where Spanish guerrillas and British forces eventually expelled the French by 1814. Meanwhile, Spanish colonies in the Americas gained independence by 1825, leaving Spain with only a few overseas territories. The 19th century saw further instability, including the Carlist Wars, Isabella II's troubled reign, the brief First Republic, and restoration of the Bourbon monarchy under Alfonso XII, only for Spain to lose its remaining colonies, Cuba, Puerto Rico, and the Philippines in the Spanish-American War of 1898 in the early 20th century. Political unrest, military defeats in Morocco, and the dictatorship of Miguel Primo de Rivera set the stage for the fall of the monarchy in 1931 and the rise of the Second Spanish Republic, which implemented sweeping reforms but became deeply polarized, leading to the Spanish Civil War in 1936 to 1939. Francisco Franco's nationalists triumphed, establishing a brutal dictatorship that suppressed regional identities and political dissent. Spain remained neutral in World War II, but later aligned with the West during the Cold War, experiencing the Spanish miracle of economic growth in the 1950s and 60s. Upon Franco's death in 1975, King Juan Carlos I led a peaceful transition to democracy, culminating in a 1978 constitution that recognized regional autonomy. Spain, integrated into NATO 1982 and the EU 1986, prospered and gained global prominence with events like the 1992 Barcelona Olympics. The 2008 financial crisis brought severe economic challenges, but Spain recovered while continuing to navigate Catalan separatism and debates over the monarchy. Today, Spain stands as a stable democracy, shaped by centuries of empire, cultural brilliance, war, dictatorship, and resilience. The archaeological record indicates human habitation in Spain hundreds of thousands of years ago, though those early populations consisted of nomadic hunter-gatherers. Human settlements gradually developed into small farming communities during the Neolithic period, around 4000 BC, giving way to the distinctive Bronze Age cultures of prehistoric Iberia. By the start of the Iron Age in the first millennium BC, Spain was a mosaic of many small tribes and trading colonies. Along the Mediterranean coast, there were the Iberians, who spoke an early Indo-European language. Inland, and in the northwest, lived various Celtic peoples, while the Lusitanians lived in the extreme west. Further south in the southwest, the Tartessians controlled important trading centers such as Gdor, modern-day Cadiz. But at the same time, seafaring civilizations from the eastern Mediterranean had established outposts along the western coastline. Beginning in the 9th century BC, Phoenician traders founded settlements such as Gadara, modern-day Cadiz, followed by the Greeks in the 7th to 6th centuries BC, who established their own settlements at places such as Empire and Catalonia. By the 5th to 4th centuries BC, the mighty Carthage, a Phoenician successor state in North Africa, extended its influence over southern Iberia, controlling former Phoenician colonies and new bases like Carthagon Nova, modern Cartagena. Thus, until the 3rd century BC, Iberia remained a patchwork of these powers, both native and foreign alike. In the early 3rd century BC, however, everything changed. That was when the two ancient superpowers of the age, Carthage and Rome, went to war. The Second Punic War fought from 218 to 201 BC. The most famous general of the conflict, Hannibal Barca, infamously marched his army from Spain across the Alps into Italy. But in the end, Rome defeated Carthage and expelled the Carthaginians from Iberia by 206 BC over the next 2 centuries. Rome gradually conquered the rest of the Iberian Peninsula. Though facing stiff resistance from local tribes, notably the Celtarians, the Roman conquest was completed in 19 BC under the reign of the first emperor, Augustus, after the Cantabrian Wars in the far north. There, the locals known as the Cantabri and Astori were fierce warriors who resisted the Romans for decades. But thereafter, the region was firmly integrated into the Roman world as Hispa. During the Republican period, Rome had established provinces throughout the Mediterranean, including Hispa, Tarraconensis in the east, and Cilia in the south. Later, the whole of the peninsula was incorporated into the province of Hispa. The Romans built many cities across the territory, such as modern-day Tarragona, Merida, and Saragossa. They also constructed roads, aqueducts, and other infrastructure that facilitated trade and travel. Under Augustus, the emperor granted land to veterans of his armies, who formed agricultural colonies throughout the countryside. Overall, Hispania's economy flourished. It exported abundant quantities of grain, olive oil, wine, and metals to other parts of the empire. The influx of wealth and prosperity stimulated urbanization and the development of commerce. Increasingly, the inhabitants of Hispania adopted the Latin language and Roman customs, becoming more Romanized. During the Augustan period, Hispania produced some of Rome's most influential figures, including the philosophers Seneca and Lucan, the poet Martial, and the emperors Trajan and Hadrian. By the late Roman period, the territory of Hispania had been thoroughly Romanized, laying the groundwork for the emergence of early Spanish culture. As the Western Roman Empire began to collapse in the early 5th century AD, several migrating Germanic tribes invaded and ultimately settled across Hispania. In the early 400s, waves of Vandals, Suabi and Alans crossed the Pyrenees Mountains and seized different regions. The Suabi established a kingdom in Galicia, and the Vandals took control of parts of the south. Before long, however, another Germanic people, the Visigoths, entered Spain around 415 AD and gradually unified the peninsula under their rule, centered first in Toulouse in modern France, and later in Toledo. The Visigothic kingdom expelled or subdued the other tribes, and also pushed out the Byzantine Greek enclave in the south that had been established sometime earlier. By the late 6th century, the Visigothic kingdom of Toledo governed nearly all of Iberia, lasting for over 2 centuries as a successor to the Roman state, preserving many of the laws, customs, culture, and religion of the Hispano-Roman population. Then in 711 AD, a momentous invasion changed the course of Spanish history forever. An army of Muslim Arabs and Berbers from North Africa crossed the Strait of Gibraltar and landed in Iberia. They took advantage of an ongoing Visigothic civil war and won a decisive victory over King Roderick at the Battle of Guadalete. Following this, the Muslim forces led by Tariq and his superior Musa ibn Nusa swept rapidly across the peninsula. By 718 AD, the invaders, known to Europeans as Moors, had conquered almost the entirety of Iberia. The region came to be known as Al-Andalus, under Muslim rule, with only a small area in the mountainous north remaining outside their control, which would eventually form the Christian kingdom of Asturias. The Islamic conquest inaugurated a momentous new era. Muslim Spain became a province of the vast Umayyad Caliphate. But when that empire fragmented during the Abbasid Revolution in the 8th century, an independent Muslim polity was declared first as the Emirate of Cordoba under Abd al-Rahman in 756, and later as the Caliphate of Cordoba under Abd al-Rahman III in 929. Muslim Spain became a beacon of intellectual inquiry and scientific advancement, known as the Golden Age of Spain. During this period, the works of ancient Greek and Roman thinkers were preserved and studied, and Muslim scholars made significant contributions to mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and philosophy. The great polymath Averroes, for example, was born in Cordoba in 1126 and became one of the most influential interpreters of Aristotelian philosophy. Muslim Spain was also highly tolerant religiously. While Islam was dominant, Muslim authorities generally allowed Christians and Jews to practice their faiths in exchange for attacks, leading to a multi-religious society. This period, sometimes called La Convivencia, saw Muslims, Christians, and Jews living in relative peace and producing a rich cultural blend. Great intellectual figures such as the Muslim polymath Averroes and the Jewish philosopher Maimonides lived in Al-Andalus. The city of Cordoba itself boasted libraries and universities that were among the most advanced in medieval Europe. Moreover, Muslim Spain became immensely prosperous. Crops such as rice and irrigation techniques were introduced to Europe from the Muslim world, and Muslim farmers cultivated vineyards across the countryside. Cities such as Cordoba, Seville, and Granada were commercial hubs for international trade. Spain's agricultural surplus and strategic location along the Mediterranean Sea made it a breadbasket for North Africa and a nexus for trade between the East and West. It produced fine steel and silk, as well as a high quality of wines. Many of Spain's architectural marvels were constructed during this era of Muslim rule, including the iconic Great Mosque of Cordoba and later the Alhambra Palace in Granada. Politically, however, Muslim Spain began to fragment over time. The unified Caliphate of Cordoba disintegrated in the early 11th century into smaller principalities called tifas, which frequently competed with one another. This fragmentation made it easier for the Christian kingdoms of the north, which had emerged out of the earlier kingdom of Asturias, to reclaim territory. Over the ensuing centuries, the frontier between Islamic and Christian Spain shifted back and forth as power waxed and waned on each side. Figures such as El Cid exploited the feuding power dynamics to carve out territories for themselves. But by the turn of the 13th century, the northern Christian kingdoms of Leon, Castile, Navarra, and Portugal had consolidated and began to push their frontiers further south as part of the centuries. Long conflict against the Muslims known as the Reconquista. Alarmed by the Christian advances, the Muslim Tifa kings sought help from powerful Berber dynasties in Morocco. The Almoravids, and later the Almohads, were Islamic fundamentalist empires that crossed from Morocco into Spain to reinforce Muslim defenses. The decisive turning point came in the year 1212 at the Battle of Las Navas de Tolosa, where a coalition of Christian kings won a crushing victory over the Almohads, rapidly overrun the rest of Al-Andalus in the aftermath. By 1250, nearly the entire peninsula was under Christian control, with the sole exception of the Emirate of Granada in the far south. This last remaining Muslim enclave survived for 2 more centuries by paying tribute to Castile. Meanwhile, the various Christian kingdoms continued to consolidate, forming the early foundations of a unified Spain. By the late 15th century,